The year is 1940. Across Europe, the Nazi war machine has delivered a series of shocking victories, shattering the illusion of French might and driving the British to their island stronghold. Poland, the first victim of this blitzkrieg, is now an occupied terror state, its intelligentsia systematically targeted for annihilation. Amidst the chaos of the Polish underground state, the Armia Krajowa, or Home Army, whispers of a new German camp, being rapidly constructed near the small town of Auschwitz, begin to circulate. The name Auschwitz meant nothing to the world, but the fear it generated suggested something unprecedented. The high command of the Polish resistance in Warsaw faced a desperate strategic dilemma. They knew the enemy's terror must be exposed, but they had no intelligence. The initial, fragmented reports indicated a brutal labor camp, but the scale and the ultimate horrifying purpose remained veiled in Nazi secrecy. They needed a witness. They needed a living sacrifice, a highly trained officer willing to voluntarily enter the unknown, to be swallowed by the German system, and somehow, against all odds, find a way to report back. It was an act of espionage so audacious, so contrary to every principle of survival, that it bordered on lunacy. The man who volunteered for this unique form of martyrdom was Captain Witold Pilecki. At 39, Pilecki was not a starry-eyed recruit, but a hardened veteran, a cavalry officer decorated for his service in the Polish-Soviet War, a landowner and a devoted husband and father of 2 young children. His decision was not driven by blind zeal, but by a cold, calculated duty. He understood that to save the nation's soul, someone had to confront the darkness directly. As he later reflected, the mission was a necessity born of desperation, to enter the German fortress, not just to observe, but to build an army from within, an internal combustion engine of resistance. The plan was surgical in its precision. Pilecki meticulously constructed the identity of Tomasz Serafiński, a civilian targeted in the Gestapo sweeps, Łapanka. On the morning of September 19, 1940, Pilecki knowingly placed himself in the middle of a massive German street roundup in the Żoliborz district of Warsaw. He was seized, herded into trucks, and immediately subjected to the dehumanizing brutality that defined Nazi captivity. The transit to Auschwitz was a 2-day initiation into hell. Packed into overcrowded, disease-ridden rail cars, Pilecki and his fellow captives endured merciless beatings and psychological torment. It was here, amongst the dying and the terrified, that Pilecki began his task, his mind already calculating the weak points of his captors. When he finally arrived at the gates of Auschwitz, the scene was one of bewildering, deceptive order. The infamous sign, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free, hung over the entrance, a cynical promise that mocked the reality within. Stripped of his clothes, his hair shorn, and his identity replaced by the prisoner number 4859, Pilecki was fully initiated. The sheer scale of the barracks, the sterile, calculated cruelty of the SS guards, and the visible misery of the initial Polish prisoners, mostly intellectuals and political leaders, confirmed his darkest fears. This was not merely a prison, but a sophisticated engine designed for destruction. Pilecki's mission began under the constant shadow of the SS. His first objective was survival, achieved through sheer physical endurance and mental discipline. His second objective was the construction of the underground network, the Związek Organizacji Wojskowej Z.O.W, or the Union of Military Organizations. Recognizing the pervasive danger of informants and the brutality of Gestapo interrogations, Pilecki instituted a revolutionary security structure for his network, the Fives. The Z.O.W was organized into cells of 5 men, each cell leader knowing only his 4 subordinates and the leaders of the 2 adjacent cells. This geometric compartmentalization meant that if one cell was betrayed, only a fraction of the network could be exposed. Pilecki, operating under his fake name, positioned himself at the absolute apex of this pyramid, the single point of failure, but also the single point of control. Working in the chaos of the early camp, where bricks were laid for new crematoria and swamps were drained by the bloodied hands of prisoners, Pilecki recruited based on patriotism, discipline and a quiet, steely resolve. He targeted fellow officers, priests and members of the Polish intelligentsia, men who understood the necessity of armed action and strategic discipline. The Z.O.W. grew rapidly, spreading its tendrils throughout the camp administration. Its purpose went beyond simple intelligence gathering. It was a functioning supportive structure. They secured better work assignments for key members, smuggled in extra rations to keep their most vital contacts alive, and crucially, managed to compile the first detailed inventory of the camp's expanding population and its escalating cruelty. Pilecki had successfully created a secret army within the belly of the Nazi beast. He was the only person on Earth who held the key to the most horrific secret of the war, but he knew this was just the beginning. The intelligence had to reach the outside world, and the Allied forces had to be convinced to act before the true purpose of Auschwitz was fully realized. Pilecki's self-imposed captivity continued through the harsh winter of 1940-1941, a period of unrelenting death within the camp walls. His identity as prisoner 4859 gave him an unparalleled, terrifying view of Auschwitz's transformation. What began as a brutal labor camp for Polish political prisoners rapidly mutated into a monstrous factory of death. As 1941 advanced, Pilecki's intelligence missions became increasingly perilous and morally devastating. He was present to witness the arrival of Soviet prisoners of war and the systematic testing of new methods of mass murder. The Z.O.W. network, operating in the camp's most vital and dangerous positions, the hospital, the kitchens and the administrative offices, began, documenting the gruesome details of the Nazis' evolving extermination. A policy Pilecki personally witnessed the infamous first gas experiments in September 1941. In the cellars of Block 11, the SS experimented with Zyklon B granules, initially killing hundreds of Soviet POWs and sick Polish prisoners. Pilecki's reports noted the sickening efficiency, detailing the suffocating terror and the SS doctor's cold, clinical observation of the process. This was the moment the true, horrifying purpose of the camp was unveiled. It was not just about forced labor. It was about industrial-scale genocide. The Z.O.W. network risked their lives daily to collect and process this data. They documented the relentless selections for the gas chambers, recorded the numbers of prisoners being trucked to their death, and gathered evidence of the barbaric medical experiments conducted by the SS physicians. The network's intelligence was compiled into small, coded messages, micro-written documents, and clandestine drawings. Pilecki's first intelligence reports, known collectively as the Witolds report, began to leave the camp as early as November 1940. These initial communications were smuggled out by prisoners who had managed to escape or were released, a rare occurrence for Polish, non-Jewish prisoners in the camp's early phase, or by Polish workers on external assignments. The documents followed a perilous route, passing from the Z.O.W. leadership to the Armia Krajowa headquarters in Warsaw, and eventually traveling through occupied Europe to the Polish government in exile in London. The task of getting the world to believe the reports proved as difficult as escaping the camp itself. The contents were so unbelievable, so grotesque in their calculated cruelty, that Allied intelligence agencies, the British MI6 and American OSS, reacted with profound skepticism. They had documented German atrocities, but the concept of gas chambers and systematic industrial-scale annihilation was simply beyond the comprehension of Western military planners. Pilecki's reports were often dismissed as exaggerations, the product of prisoner despair or Polish propaganda. The Allies simply could not conceive that the reports were an accurate, clinical description of reality. Pilecki was forced to remain inside, his mission of pure intelligence gathering morphing into a desperate campaign to convince the world of its own moral blind spot. Despite the crushing disbelief from the outside, Pilecki remained resolute. He continued to grow the Z.O.W. and pivoted his planning. If the world would not listen, he would force their hand. His ultimate secret objective was the armed liberation of Auschwitz. He reasoned that if the Allies would not launch an external parachute assault to free the prisoners and seize the evidence, the Z.O.W. would initiate a massive internal uprising to coincide with a small Allied attack. The Z.O.W. established communication with local resistance cells outside the camp, secretly preparing escape routes, and even planning to seize crucial SS communications equipment during the revolt. However, as 1942 drew to a close, the situation inside the camp grew exponentially worse. The arrival of mass transports of Jews, the opening of the larger Birkenau, Auschwitz II, complex with its purpose-built gas chambers, and the sheer volume of death made the idea of a successful armed revolt increasingly suicidal. The SS security measures were flawless, and the sheer number of prisoners was paralyzing. Pilecki realized that his internal army, while powerful, could not breach the walls without external support. His 2.5 years within the camp had reached a critical impasse. He had witnessed the transition from genocide by neglect to genocide by design. He had documented the Holocaust from its very inception. Now, with the Allies ignoring his pleas for external military intervention and the Z.O.W. leadership in danger of being compromised or executed, Pilecki made his second great terrifying decision. He had to escape to report in person. He had to become the physical proof of his own unbearable message. By early 1943, the conditions within Auschwitz were apocalyptic. The industrialization of mass murder at Birkenau was in full swing, and the risks for Pilecki's Z.O.W. network had reached a breaking point. The Gestapo, now employing more ruthless infiltration and interrogation techniques, had begun to close in on the resistance cells. Pilecki knew he could not risk the capture of a senior member who might reveal the entire network structure under torture. Furthermore, the Polish underground had repeatedly denied his fervent requests for a large-scale assault on the camp, believing the logistics impossible and the scale of the atrocities exaggerated. The intelligence had failed to move the world. Pilecki realized that the sheer horror of his message, the existence of the gas chambers and the Zyklon B protocols, required the physical presence of the witness. He was the key. He had to escape. Escape from Auschwitz was a gamble, with odds measured in fractions of a percent. Only a handful of prisoners had ever successfully breached the perimeter, which was guarded by watchtowers, electrified barbed wire, and machine gun posts. Pilecki did not have the luxury of a slow, meticulous plan. He had to rely on the privileged yet perilous positions held by his Z.O.W. network. Pilecki and two trusted comrades, Jędrzej and Edward Ciesielski, chose a simple yet audacious plan, reliant on chaos and darkness. Their opportunity came through their assignment in the camp's bakery, which was located outside the main camp perimeter near the Vistula River and guarded by relatively fewer SS men. On the night of April 26 to 27, 1943, the three men executed their escape. Utilizing their knowledge of the bakery's security, the three men managed to overpower a guard, cut the wires to the alarm system, and slip into the night. Their final action was the most dangerous, breaching a heavy metal door. Ciesielski, known for his strength, managed to pry the lock open with a crowbar, and the three men bolted into the darkness. The instant the escape was discovered, the entire Auschwitz complex descended into a frenzy. Searchlights swept the fields, machine guns rattled, and the infamous Kettenhunden, the SS guards with their attack dogs, were deployed. Pilecki and his comrades ran through the surrounding fields, constantly changing direction. Pursued by the screaming dogs and the harsh glare of the lights, they were free from the wires but not from the enemy. For the next several days, they were fugitives, relying on the tenuous help of local Polish farmers and resistance members, dodging German patrols and traversing dozens of miles on foot. Pilecki, weak from years of starvation and labor, pushed his body past the point of exhaustion. After a harrowing journey, Pilecki reached his Z.O.W. contact, and within weeks, he was back in contact with the central command of the Armia Krajowa in Warsaw. He immediately began compiling his formal, comprehensive report, detailing the systematic extermination of Jews, the use of Zyklon B in the gas chambers, the arrival of the massive transports, and the precise numbers of the dead. His report was a document of profound historical importance. It was the world's first internal eyewitness account of the inner workings of an extermination camp. The Z.O.W. had been severely strained by his absence, but the network survived. Pilecki's intelligence was quickly passed up the chain to the Polish government in exile in London. From there, the report was forwarded to the highest echelons of Allied power in Washington and London. Yet, once again, the sheer scale of the horror proved to be the report's undoing. Allied leaders, particularly those in key military positions, found the allegations of gas chambers and daily incinerations of thousands to be wildly improbable. They were accustomed to German cruelty, but not to German industrialized genocide. The reports were filed, deemed too horrific to be credible, and the vital request for an Allied air or ground assault to liberate Auschwitz was denied. Pilecki, the man who had risked certain death to bring the truth from the deepest abyss of the Third Reich, was alive, but his message had failed to ignite the necessary action. He was a hero without a following, a witness whose testimony was too damning for the world to believe. His war against the Nazis continued, but his greatest sorrow was the knowledge that the systematic murder he had documented was still proceeding at full murderous capacity. Having delivered his devastating report, Witold Pilecki did not seek refuge. He immediately rejoined the active Polish underground, bringing his unique operational expertise to the fight against the Nazi occupiers. He served under the alias Roman, and eventually rose to become the commander of a crucial resistance cell during the Warsaw Uprising of August 1944. The uprising was a desperate, 63-day battle waged by the Polish Home Army against overwhelming German forces, an effort Pilecki fought in with the same fierce dedication he displayed within Auschwitz. He commanded the redoubt of Witold, one of the most stubbornly defended positions in the Wola district. When the uprising was finally crushed, Pilecki, like tens of thousands of other Polish soldiers, was captured by the Germans and sent to a prisoner of war, POW camp, a relative safety he had previously yearned for, but now found ironic. He was eventually liberated by the Allied forces in 1945. The war had ended, but Pilecki's fight for a free Poland was far from over. Poland was not liberated. It was simply transferred from one totalitarian regime to another, falling under the iron grip of the Soviet-backed communist government. Recognizing the new, dark reality, Pilecki refused repatriation to a communist state. He remained in Italy with the Polish Second Corps, yet felt a deep, unwavering loyalty to his homeland. In 1945, he undertook one last perilous mission. He volunteered to return to Poland in secret to gather intelligence on the brutal Soviet occupation and the suppression of the democratic opposition. His objective was to inform the Polish government in exile in London and the Western Allies about the true nature of the new regime. Pilecki's ultimate, heartbreaking fate was sealed not by the enemy he had faced for 5 years, but by the very regime that claimed to have liberated Poland. On May 8, 1947, Pilecki was arrested by the Polish security forces, Urząd Bezpieczeństwa or UB, in Warsaw. He was accused of espionage for a foreign imperialist power, the West Polish government in exile, and leading a counter-revolutionary network. What followed was a brutal, drawn-out ordeal of interrogation and torture that mirrored the horrors he had documented in Auschwitz. Despite the intense physical torment, far worse, he noted privately, than anything the Nazis had inflicted on him in the early camp, Pilecki revealed no sensitive information and fiercely protected his associates. His trial, held in a Soviet-style show court in March 1948, was a travesty of justice. Though many of his former comrades, including his former Auschwitz contact, Tomasz Serafiński, whose identity Pilecki had borrowed, testified to his heroism against the Nazis, their pleas were ignored. Józef Cyrankiewicz, a survivor of Auschwitz who had worked with Pilecki in the camp resistance but was now a high-ranking communist official, refused to intervene. Pilecki was found guilty and sentenced to death. His final words to his wife, Maria, whom he saw only once before his execution, were a chilling summation of his life. "I cannot live. They will kill me, but you must live." On May 25, 1948, Captain Witold Pilecki, Polish hero, intelligence officer, and the only man to voluntarily infiltrate Auschwitz, was executed with a shot to the back of the head at Mokotów prison in Warsaw. His burial site was never revealed, and his memory was systematically erased from public history by the communist regime. For over 40 years, Witold Pilecki became a non-person. The communist government condemned his heroism and attempted to bury the truth of his anti-Soviet mission. It was only after the collapse of the Soviet bloc in 1989 that his story could finally be told publicly. Today, Pilecki is recognized as one of Poland's greatest national heroes. His courage, his strategic brilliance, and the singular sacrifice of his mission to enter Auschwitz stand as a testament to human fortitude. His full report detailing the systematic genocide is a crucial historical document, a moral indictment of both the Nazi terror that created Auschwitz and the communist regime that executed the man who dared to expose it. Pilecki's life embodies the tragic irony of Poland's war, a fight for freedom that continued even after the celebrated victory of 1945.